our panel discussion, I would like to begin by advertising the topic that we are about to discuss. It is a very topical and controversial topic, and as you will find, many of the questions will be asked have more than one answer. But what I would like to begin by sharing is a story written by Charles Dickens about two towns, and there was this one phrase that describes the state of this world in the last 30 years. We knew better time. We've known better times. We've known worse times. We've lived in times of wisdom and in times of utter stupidity. We've witnessed complete faith and complete lack of faith. If we look at the global world, we've followed this path. We've had periods of great growth and depressions and pandemics and other shocks that have befallen us. Why? Is it because the whole system fails, or individuals fail, or the fundamental theories that we rely upon? It's a little weird. We are developing disruptive technologies now. We are putting people in orbit, most recently using private spacecraft. We are beginning to think about colonizing Mars. But we have not been particularly good at managing financial capital, and we are not particularly good at keeping this important balance, which is so crucial to the relationship between the state and the individual and our internal balance. We have a great panel of experts that I'm so looking forward to introducing to you. It is a great honor to have Henryka Bochniarz. She's not just an activist from Poland. She is an ex-minister of the Polish government. And she is the mother of 8,000 entrepreneurs, if I can put it this way. And yesterday we listened to her speech at one of the panels. Volodymyr Popereshnyuk, I don't think I even need to introduce him, because the company that he has created, and it celebrated its 20th anniversary this year, is indeed a role model in this market. That each and every one of you has used its service at least 10 times, and I hope you will continue using their services. I'm also happy to welcome Dmytro Kysylevskyi, Deputy Chair of the Parliamentary Committee for Economic Development. It's straight out of a parliamentary session, so we could have some fresh answers about economic. And Andrei Brodsky, CEO of Titan Era. It's not just a company that claims 2% in the global titanium market. It's a company that has developed a unique and pretty inexpensive technology for producing titanium. And he is the person who has invested very prominently in terms of promoting this industry globally. And I'm also very happy to welcome Mr. Johannes Schnitzer, somebody who knows so much about public procurement and government relations, is the chief legal counsel at McKinsey. The first question goes to everyone on the panel, and I don't think I will be taken in any negative way, that if we are going to speak about the pandemic and whether the role of the government has changed in the course of the ongoing pandemic. If it has, how? over the past 2 years, the world has spent $24 trillion to save economies from collapsing into probably the worst depression that we've seen in years. We've seen unprecedented harmonization of policies among regulators across the world. We've seen a lot of turbulence and turmoil that have befallen individual countries. But the good news is that the global economy is recovering faster than we expected. Now we have a commodity super cycle that has led to very positive results and effects on businesses. How has this mixture been created? And are we seeing tectonic shifts in the role of the government in the economy?
It's good afternoon. First I will start with a very personal comment, because I attended, the panel on investing in Ukraine. And yesterday, it was a privilege to listen to your Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Ministers. And we just shared this comment with Professor Kołotko, who used to be the Deputy Minister in the governments that were actually a few years after my government. That was the second Solidarity government. And I still have this kind of a déjà vu that you are exactly at the moment of Poland in 1991. And, with all young people and, prospects and opportunities and this drive towards Europe, I mean, this is fantastic. So keep the moment, work hard, because I'm absolutely sure that if you will go in this direction, you can achieve maybe even more than Poland. And going back to maybe the one comment, you don't have enough women. On the panels, only men. The government, only men. Ladies, do something with that, because it's necessary. But getting back to your question, I think that actually we can see, looking at the role of the governments during the pandemic, at first, this is obvious. Always, if there is a crisis, people, they are turning to, the power that can have an information. In this case, can offer vaccines. In this case, can offer money to support individuals, to support companies, to support the health system. And I think that, it was very easy to see that there were big differences among the countries. And again, the showcase of inequalities. Because if there was a country able to control the information, already, advance in digitalization, it was much easier. Imagine this catastrophe, in 10 years ago, when we didn't have that much access to technologies that allow us to introduce remote work, remote school. So, for some of the countries, I don't know how it looked like here in Ukraine, but we in Poland, we actually switched pretty quickly to, these new standards. And that's why the economy didn't pay very high price for that. But, 500 million kids in the world, they didn't have an access to internet. So what that means, there will be growing inequalities, right? So I think that that shows perfectly that we just have to do whatever it's possible to make our government, make state, modern, advance in technologies, because in case of any issue, we can help each other. On the other hand, that showed perfectly that we have to be very careful, again, with those technologies. Because, in some of the countries, it was a perfect way to control the societies, to control the situation. And I mean that one of the lessons that we have to learn from what happened during the pandemic is that actually our IT infrastructure, access to data, control of data, this is one probably of the biggest challenges for the future. So, I mean, to me, this is the most important lesson because you are one of the countries that I can imagine can be very advanced in IT technologies, having, I got this number, 250,000 IT people, right? So you can make this progress, but on the other hand, you have to be careful with implementation because there are positive and some negative sides of this.
Thanks, Henryka. It's always people who come in here always say that you have so much freedom in comparison with us, so we hope that it will continue. Владимир, как вы смотрите на эту ситуацию, зная, что вы следите?
Volodymyr, what is your take on this situation? I know that you have done quite some research in economic theory in terms of how the role of the government has evolved in the current environment, and what is a sense of direction going forward. Now, you started off by describing our era. So we live in times of good knowledge of physics and IT, but a lot of people who have very little knowledge of economics. Let me speak about the role of the government. The role of the government has not changed in this pandemic-stricken environment. The role of the government is to slow down the economy. And it has always been the case. This is an economic law. It is not about any personalities. Those are distinct roles. The role of the entrepreneur is to promote economic growth. The role of the public official is to obstruct it. And if somebody is wearing both hats, they are promoting economic growth as an entrepreneur, but they are also slowing it down with their government hat on. So an entrepreneur is after profits, and they are doing a lot of work, and they are prepared to change behavior to derive more profits. But if they've derived their profit, it means that they've satisfied the client and they've made a rational use of resources available to them. It's basically when the entrepreneur takes a certain input and processes it and creates a product with higher value, and this is how they earn a profit, and this is how they support economic growth. Then the entrepreneur can spend this extra money, but they want to grow in the future. They begin investing. They then join other capitalists, and they begin to produce more goods and services. This is how the economy evolves. So entrepreneurs is the only force promoting genuinely economic growth. And what's in this way? Regulation, which is a function of government, and pandemic. Who decided to close down the shops and restaurants? It was the government who decided that. And now there are many supply chains that are being disrupted is because the government intervened to impose restrictions. Now, this is a man-made crisis that the government has created, and this is just an economic law. It's not about any personalities. And this analogy that the governments intervene and they coerce entrepreneurs into giving up a piece of their earnings. So, in taxes, but if taxes continue to be collected, certainly this diminishes the entrepreneurs' capabilities in terms of investing in their business, in labor productivity. Those are pretty objective laws of economics. When the government collects taxes, it spends some part of it to feed itself. Some part of it goes into obstructing entrepreneurs even further, even to a greater extent. And some part of it is spent to create public goods. Yes, we all consume public goods. They're building roads for us, they are providing us with education. But the issue is that the government does not pursue earnings. So a public official is not driven by making a profit. They are incapable of creating a public good that has value, attractive value for the consumer. They can't even do any basic costing whenever they're creating a product. So a priori, whatever the government is doing, is either nobody needs those products or it is too expensive. When you see a road and you're driving down this road, yes, it is a public good. But bear in mind, this road was built by decreasing economic potential is in other sectors. As Henryka once said, we see the road, but we don't see the harm that that road inflicted on other industries. I'm not arguing against roads, but roads must be privatized. Private entrepreneurs should invest in building roads without reducing the economic potential of other industries, but contributing to the economy as a whole. And this could lead to reducing barriers and taxes, and we will see so much more in terms of economic growth. We're going to discuss this further. Inequalities and overheads that businesses are not prepared to meet, but the government still continues to support them. I respect libertarian views, but I will also beg to differ from those views. It was not a libertarian view. I was speaking about the economy.
Following, my previous comment, actually that kind of views, it was easier to hear in Poland in 1990. Today, probably, maybe Professor Balcerowicz, but even him would be, your point of view would be too aggressive.
Dmitry, со стороны...
Dmitry, from the other side of things, from the government side, how could you respond to this? Yes, let me begin by sharing some. The libertarian views represent the most harmful economic theory that could lead Ukraine to the worst poverty that we could even think of. We've seen for the first time the book by Friedrich List that he published in Ukrainian. So is one quote: "A nation who is used protectionism to increase through its industry and shipbuilding, they should give up those artificial scaffoldings and then sell everyone else on the value of free trade." This was the United Kingdom. So it's free markets. It's those countries who wish to impose their own agenda. So if we argue for the state to leave the economy, we will not have many entrepreneurs. We are not choosing between the government playing an active role in the economy or no role at all. We are talking about the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian economy and the role of other countries who are defending their economic interests in our territory. This is what this debate should be about. Now, that's my reaction. Now, your question about the pandemic. It's actually just to pick up on some of the things that I already made. So I would like to make 2 points: that they were hiding behind certain mottos, and then now the pandemic has brought them into sharp relief. The coronavirus pandemic has forced countries to throw away their masks and come into the open. How they are, in fact, practicing protectionism. This used to be disguised in some way, but now they're not hiding anymore. So the sums committed in protectionist measures are measured by hundreds of millions, those by the US, by European Union. So it's Biden, very liberal president. First week he signed an executive order to strengthen the Buy American Act. And in order to protect American manufacturers. It's not very clear who they are defending them from. The European Green Deal is an example of top-notch protectionism being disguised by all those great green development goals, and it's basically the EU is fencing itself off while they're modernizing to become greener. No one else is welcome. So it's like they used to use various disguises, not anymore. Now their attitude to other countries has changed too. Now it's Poland is reducing the number of licenses to transit goods by road. You've seen those long queues. That is a free market. Poland goes, we don't want your trucks here to drive across our country. Order our own trucking companies. You want to deliver apples somewhere in Europe? Let them rot, unless you wish to hire our own freight forwarders. Now, the EU ambassador, look, each time I keep reiterating this, the EU ambassador plainly stated in an interview that Ukraine should forget about a localization law. Look, now, localization is something that we will be addressing in due course. No, look, I will be done. I can talk for hours about localization. The British minister of colonial times, they could basically take this kind of liberty and make that statement. But a EU minister should not think it appropriate to make such a colonial statement to a third country. Now, another important thing, something that is also now come to the surface, the Ukrainian liberals always disappear whenever a crisis strikes. Okay, now, whenever there's a crisis, where is the government? Where is public health care? Where are all public services? The most liberal people keep actually demanding that. 2014, when the war started, where is our machine building? Where is our own defense industry and our army? It is the duty of the government to provide all these things, and at the same time supporting competition in the domestic market and defending its Ukrainian manufacturers. But it is all actually leading to an economic contraction, is it not? Okay, my position that the government should provide a level playing field within the country for Ukrainian manufacturers to compete freely and grow freely, help with financing instruments to encourage them to tap new markets, to conquer new market space. And it's my position. Yes, I suggest we put the full stop here, and then now we are still making introductions. We've just had two diametrically opposed views, but I would like to bring down the temperature of this. Once a Chinese philosopher, he once said the phrase that grass is green on both sides of the hedge. It is a fine balancing act, which is indeed difficult to achieve. But look, you being the CEO of such a large company, you have a lot of experience, in particular in following global trends. What can you say? Yes, I have something to share on this, and it's the grass is green, and okay, which side of the hedge, and that's okay. I'm going to come on to this, but I'm more in favor of Dmytro's ideology. Keynesian theory is still there, and it's still very popular. So, a flashback into history. This pandemic-driven crisis has been compared by many by its effect on the economy with World War II. Now, let's look at who won World War II and what they laid down to bring about their victory. It was the US military, the US defense industry that won this war, that enabled mass production, and they were supplying armaments not only for their own military, but also under the famous Land-Lease contract. They were supplying the economies and armies of the Allied nations. Who was paying for all this, and why was it being done? It was being done, and it was being paid by public funding. It was the government. It was new money issuance, but it had strings attached. And as of the beginning of World War II, the United States had little to no defense industry at all. They had a very small military, and and if I recall correctly, Roosevelt, who was the deputy chair of Joint Chief of Staffs, his conclusion was that Germany could potentially, as of the start of World War II, it would 6 divisions of the German military would be enough to completely occupy the United States. So going back to the current corona crisis, now it's that the government has finally fulfilled its role. A lot of new money has been printed. A lot of cash has been injected into financial markets, but then they attached those strings. They want this money to go into infrastructure projects. We know that the US has adopted some $3 trillion. It's a program to encourage infrastructure investments. And the EU followed suit too. And something that Dmytro also raised, very handsome direct subsidies have been given to large companies to help them survive, but then again with strings attached. That certain goods will have to be produced, which has actually trapped an outbreak of inflation. So the government fulfilled its role. And that's what they did 70 years ago in the US and other developed countries. So we understand that the theory, it's all cyclical, and it doesn't really matter what causes the next crisis. History repeats itself. The spring is either getting compressed or it gets released.
The pandemic on the state role.
Thank you. Yeah. Maybe my first comment, I think what COVID is showing us that the private and public sector need to work together like never before. I think what we saw is that supply chains, global supply chains were breaking down. We didn't have any competition in the market. Governments needed to pay enormous and absurd sums for vaccinations or for masks. So I think what this crisis is really showing, private, public sector need to work together. As I said, like never before. I think this will be the key change. What is also, I think, very interesting is that obviously the COVID pandemic required governments to save thousands of lives and livelihoods. And the governments needed to invest and still need to invest billions of dollars or euro. And at the same time, obviously governments are required to manage their spending effectively. So I think that the key challenge will be actually how to manage this, to invest in the market, to invest in key areas like healthcare, digitalization, and at the same time do this in an efficient way that the government, which I think we should never forget, is always using tax money. I'm in Austria, my income tax is 5.0. So what I would like to see that governments are spending this tax money obviously in a wise way, but at the same time, and I think maybe this is the opportunity, I think also the government needs to find maybe a different way of cooperation with the private sector, in particular when it comes to public procurement. We can talk about this later. There's this very interesting discussion going on about localization, which I think is also interesting because what typically, but let's say international public procurement regimes like the WTO government procurement agreement, and I had the pleasure to assist Ukraine to join this agreement a couple of years ago, and the UE trade agreement, association agreement they want fair competition, they want cross-border competition. And now I think we are now starting with this discussion of protectionism, which I think is maybe not the right one, but very happy to discuss this localization topic a bit later.
Следующий вопрос у меня будет к Владимиру.
The next question is to Volodymyr. And we have Grzegorz Kolotko in this audience, whom I hold in the highest esteem. And several years ago, we had a discussion about this. Out of what we are discussing today, getting the impression that the liberal economic model that we are so accustomed to is actually on the way out. Do you think that it is part of the new normal that is shaping up in front of our eyes? Because what we are witnessing now is a casino-type economy, which has a very deep chasm between the real economy and the financial world, and as a response to this, we've seen increasing protectionism, increasing conservatism, and views that are different from those on which the liberal economic model relies. Yeah.
At the end, who would answer that? Actually, I don't think so that, we are living in a, as you named that, casino economy. It seems to me that, we are just in the learning process, because somebody mentioned that the pandemic was like, the Second World War. But we know, it was completely different, right? So from every crisis, we are learning, and it's the same process right now. And I think that the financial crisis that we, survived, let's say, in 2008, that touched, just part of the economy. And with the pandemic is different, it touched everyone, every institution. So that's why this learning process has to be even, deeper and longer. And we see that in the countries which are supposed to be, an example of the small state, like the US mentioned here, or the UK, they are introducing measures that, it would be hard to imagine that they would be introduced, a few years ago. And on the other hand, we are looking for this, good relations between the private and, the state-owned sector. So it seems to me that, again, every country is different, and this is not that we have a receipt for, everyone. And we are looking for that kind of solutions, in Poland, in developed economies. So I think that this is, just the process that we just have to watch carefully, and actually not to go in extreme direction. That means, not towards protectionism, because that's very dangerous. And we know that globalization, which, we can escape from that, but maybe we went too far with that, right? And now we are looking for a kind of a, a middle of the road that can work for, most of us. So I think that, the most important is that we have to have different participants of this discussion. The worst what can happen is to give it, only to the people from the governments, the international institutions, every individual. And that's why it's so important to have that kind of institutional framework. And actually, in some of the countries, it's pretty strong, and we can have, the view of different, players. In some of the countries, so when we talk here about Ukraine, it's not just the government, right? You have, the central bank that should be independent. Maybe you don't have that well-organized, business community, but actually that's the role for them. So it seems to me that we are just looking for a new normal, and we will find a way. So I look at this maybe because, we had this extremely deep crisis in Poland, at the end of the 80s. We started with nothing, and with, ups and downs. But we are today, maybe this is not the best moment in our, history of transformation, but definitely we reach, the level of the standard of living, the building of institutions that we can say, it's at least, works for the democratic system.
Yes, for sure, but still world is usually going to extreme, the peak of fear or peak of risk. We are always ups and downs, and generally every 5-7 years or 10 years we are witnessing the big crises, which either do the protectionism or they do the free trade in the full range. So it's still not proper reaction, but let's live with this. Владимир, с вашей стороны,
From your perspective, I would like to solicit your views in the following context. So there may be various roles that governments can play depending on whether it is a developed economy or a developing one. How to strike the right balance in terms of scale of government interventions, because when we are in the habit of blindly blueprinting other countries' experiences, so is that how it goes? Now, let me repeat my point. The laws of economics are immutable, irrespective of what is going on. The role of the entrepreneur, the role of the consumer, the role of the capitalist, and of the government have stayed the same. In terms of intervention, depending on whether it is a developed or a developing economy, the word intervention, indeed, is very appropriate in this context. An intervention has the same effect, irrespective whether it is a rich economy or a poor one. So in a rich economy, it simply freezes wealth at the same level, and those people who've accumulated wealth from a free enterprise economy, and the poor stay the poor. So basically, any intervention causes economic growth to slow down. And that is the reason why there's been a lot of interventionism recently in wealthy nations, because they've built up a lot of capital over past 200 to 300 years, and now it's actually the effect is that the economy freezes. But now we still have a lot of catching up to do. What an advanced economy can afford to do is not something Ukraine can afford to do in terms of slowing down economic growth. Now, while we have been observing in history, not as much in Western theories, but in Eastern theories, there were countries that opted for a free enterprise economy and they toggled back to the other extreme. Maybe there is no one single silver bullet who could do the job. Look, in physics, there is no one single silver bullet, but the laws of physics and mathematics are completely unassailable in terms of their being immutable. It's 2 by 4 equals 2 by 2 equals 4. Any economic miracle that the world's seen always began in a free enterprise economy environment, and then wealth was gradually built up, and then the government intervened to stop it. Now, two things that I would like to raise. Now, we've talked about government support, but whenever there's talk of government support, where is the government taking its money? So it's by taking money away from somebody else to help another person. Now, on the theme of protectionism is an erroneous mercantilist conception that was demolished 200 years ago. Whenever a nation wishes to impose barriers to prevent the inflow of cheap products from other countries, then it is actually harming itself. If a European country is defending itself from good quality, cheap products, it is creating a problem for itself. But if we retaliate by doing the same, our own consumers are having to pay the price. Now we have millions of entrepreneurs working in other countries to provide their goods to the Ukrainian consumer. And when we retaliate by mirroring the same kind of aggressive action, okay, they are withholding access to their market, we should withhold access to ours. But it is our consumer who picks up the tab on that eventually. What is the purpose of any economy? Is to meet the needs of the consumer. It's all of us. If we are protecting our consumership, we are protecting them against the option of buying a cheap, high-quality product. We are fighting the economy.
That all of us here, we are not only consumers, we are members of the society. We are responsible for many other aspects than just consumption. So sorry, but I don't want to be seen as a consumer, It's much more than that.
Yeah. Henryka, I can partly support this, yes, because actually we should define the whole system in a complex, not seeing just one side, and saying that this one side is more important than the other side, yes. But in any case, one interesting question to you, Henryka, because you mentioned this exactly, and in my opinion, it's very important. What I see is that government expenditures are much more beneficial in those cases when the optimal framework of institutional basis is built. What's your top three advice how to build efficiently this institutional basis, which is because this is extremely important for Ukraine?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the government is important, but this is not just, the one player, right? I mean, we have to put this in the environment that, other representatives of the society, they have, a right to express their opinion and have an impact on the opinion. So first, I mean, what is extremely necessary, and actually this is what we are facing right now in Poland, you have to have, good legal system, because this is actually, if you are talking about the level playing field, this is what creates the level playing field. So in order to have a good legal system, you have to have an impact or different, opinions on what actually is, the final product. If it's only by the central bank, if it's only by, the government, if it's only by the business community or by the farmers' organization, everyone has an interest, right? So the question is there a place that we can share, our opinions and find a compromise? It's very hard to achieve that. But for example, in Poland, and this is something that this is in the structure of the European Union, that we have so-called tripartite commission. That means the representative, of employers, trade unions, and the government, And I can tell you, it's time-consuming, it's very frustrating. Sometimes, I mean, there's no way that we can find a compromise. But it's worse to have that kind of institutions, So, I mean, the more independent institutions do we have, like representatives of the consumer organizations. Why not? But again, we just have to have a way of expressing opinions, sharing opinions, and finding a compromise. Otherwise, I'm afraid that, it will be always, somebody who at this moment has more power and can push, the system in a very specific direction, which actually doesn't work for other people. So I mean that for me, the institutional framework is absolutely necessary. We can see, I mean, what happened, in the States, during the presidency of Trump. But the fact that they had independent, institutions, even with that kind of president, they survived. It was hard, but they survived. And it seems to me that this is what you have to concentrate on that. And you can learn from, many experiences of different countries. Maybe Poland is not the best example, but, again, look around and find out what works in your situation. Because again, I mean, the faster you come to that, there is, I mean, more safety in the solutions that you will be looking for. So that's why, I mean, you have to concentrate. And actually, I was doing this all the time, the Congress of Women, the Confederation of Employers, everything, it was, done in this direction. Let's have good representation. And again, it's not that, it's a rosy time that you can say, yes, we can have an impact. Sometimes it's a lot of frustration. But I mean, the institutional framework to me, it's absolutely, a must.
Thanks. I think that reputation and trust to the institution, this is one of the core things which elaborate the whole framework.
They have to be transparent. Yeah. They have to, work according to rules which are accepted, and then, sure, because if you have the business organization, then 2 people, I mean, 10 people in suits selected themselves, and, there's a president and 9 vice presidents, okay? And they claim that we are the representation of the business, and the government accepts that. Then, I mean, this is definitely not a solution. You have to have representative organizations, and, you can do this. I mean, this is not, something that is impossible.
Thanks. Dmitry, короткий вопрос к вам.
A brief question to you, Dmitry. How do you see the current institutional framework that Ukraine has currently? How viable is it, or effective is it? How much trust does it enjoy? Can you describe the current situation? Let me begin by responding to some statements maybe that all developed countries actually started out as free enterprise economies. This is the biggest misconception that I've ever heard, if you excuse my French. That is utterly nonsensical. Let's go back in history and look at the United Kingdom and the US. And now, it's Friedrich List. Let me quote again from Friedrich List, but it's actually, this is just common sense. How he argued when discussing the invisible hand of the market, Adam Smith and David Ricardo, he said that if after World War II, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, and China, if they were listening and adopting those free enterprise economy theories, we would end up with 4 powerful rice makers, biggest rice producers in the world. We would not see those very advanced, highly technologically advanced players, because Japan, South Korea, China, Taiwan, they were not willing to listen. They were implementing protectionism to protect their own economies. They were promoting industrial production domestically. They were investing in processing industries. They did not have an independent central bank. The central bank was there to serve the needs of the economy. And who failed in this? Now, close by is the Philippines or Indonesia. Very good countries, highly corrupt, very poor, with lots of social problems, drug trafficking, what have you. Those actually adopted all those principles to create an independent central bank, non-intervention of the government. They ended up with what we know them now as what we know them. So, 2 examples, highly protectionist and government-driven countries now skyrocketing into global prominence, and those other countries remain strong countries that are protecting their own interests and other in a more subservient role, serving the select few, the strong countries. And ours is the choice to make here, which to pursue. Now, basically, it's back to what was said here. It's actually, this rhetoric keeps coming from our partners. What the kind of competitive environment they want us to develop towards. Their markets will be open, ours, we must open up our own markets, and they will keep theirs closed. Okay, let's go back to institutions. So can you slightly slow down, because the interpreter might not be quite keeping up with you. Okay, point taken. Okay, institutions. We keep hearing from our Western partners that Ukraine needs a strongly distributed anti-corruption infrastructure. It's important to fight corruption. Hey, we have NABU, we have NCPA, an Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, an Anti-Corruption Committee in Parliament, and each ministry has a designated anti-corruption officer. It's a very strongly distributed and well-funded anti-corruption infrastructure. Look, when we start speaking about institutions to support industrial development, we go, no, this is oligarchs, this is all, it's against our advice coming from the West. Look, if to fight corruption we need all this infrastructure, but to promote our economy we don't need institutions. How come? Now, why in the EU there are lots of institutions promoting industrial development, economic development in the US, even in more of them. Look, if you read the history of economic development in South Korea, of Japan, it is industrial associations and institutions that actually propelled their initial economic growth. The government was actually acting as one big asset management company. So in Japan, Nikki, you know this. It's the famous Trade and Industry Ministry. These things are important to share. 20,000 Japanese people. Okay, with digitization, maybe 3,000 would have sufficed. They were actually running each and every company. This is how they grew the industry initially and have been growing it since. Now, look, I think that it's really we need to maybe add one more point to this discussion, that it's a balance is not always achieved. Because of the success of developed countries with stronger regulatory regimes was not always based on access to resources. They also had to superimpose a knowledge layer that then gave this cumulative effect to propel economic growth. In some situations, when we looked at how those fluctuations evolved from peaks and troughs, from free enterprise to overregulation, then again to free enterprise. So this only exposes the market's inability to fully correct itself using entrepreneurship alone. And
you're one of the highest and biggest professional in the state procurement. And the total market of state procurement is huge. It's more than $9 trillion. And this is always the weak side of the many developing countries. Ukraine was in the quite successful path by creating the Prozora system and all other systems. But what's your experience and what's your advice? How to build up this more efficiently? And what's your experience out of Volt?
Perfect, thank you. Now you're absolutely right. So the government is by far the biggest investor. So worldwide, I guess almost 10 trillion euros, 10 trillion US dollars per year. And I think also in Ukraine, you spend around 13% of your GDP for public procurement. Which means if this is done in a smart way, actually the government can really be a driver to reimagine the economy and the society. So that's something very important. What I'm seeing in other geographies and in other countries is that governments are moving away a little bit from seeing public procurement as a pure administrative function to really a strategic function. So governments are moving away a little bit, just using lowest price, for instance. They think about quality criteria. They think about life cycle costs, cost of ownership, which is also indirectly helping regional companies and local companies, because that's also very important. All those countries actually do have the similar legal framework, which is in the European Union, the EU Public Procurement Directives, and they're all members of the WTO Government Procurement Agreement. The same is true for Ukraine. But those other countries somehow also, I think, manage to use their public procurement systems to do both, to attract foreign investment and to support local industry. So I think sometimes maybe it's not only black and white, there's a lot of gray. It's not always easy, but it is possible to use this gray and to promote again foreign investment and domestic industry. Last thought, what I think is also really important, as I said, the government can really be a driver for the reimagination of societies. So if we talk about digitalization, if we talk about healthcare, if we talk about reskilling, upskilling of workforce, there will be millions of people who need to be upskilled during the last couple of years. This is exactly something the government can do, but what I said in the beginning, together with the private sector. So public procurement allows to have smart public procurement tenders. Everyone is afraid of public procurement, saying, oh my God, that's a formalistic monster. How to deal with this? It can be done in a smart way. There are procurement procedures which actually are encouraging the private sector to feed in, to jointly develop tender documents, to jointly actually define the best solution. But again, this is something which needs to be done together between the private and the public sector.
Thanks, Johannes. Учитывая, что я сегодня иногда себя чувствую как на...
Yes, I feel as though I'm hosting a talk show. I have a question to Andrei Brodsky. Well, actually, we have been seeing increasing amounts of populism, and some German professors using data science, they've done an analysis since 1985, and they've seen that each time that populist government's share has grown, it's always resulted in a crisis. Now, if we look back at the period prior to 2019, that their share was 6 to 8% among the G20 group of countries. At the start of the pandemic, its number rose to some 43% of the total. If you follow this trend, this share has always grown before a crisis. And in an interview, you said something really important, that okay, the economic foundation, if it is eroded, then that society rushes to tweak up the political construct above the base, the economic basis. Now, sometimes resulting or leading to dictatorships or radicalism. Okay, the economic basis, the economic foundation. What is important about it? Well, it's the economy itself, the economic basis. That is the basis, that is the foundation. And I would like to really to support Dmitry's words that yes, healthy protectionism. Indeed, the role of the government is important in in promoting the nation, in improving the well-being of its population, of increasing the standard of living through investment. The government is the biggest investor, whether you like it or not. Any government. And it is investing through healthcare, it is investing through public procurement, it is investing directly by buying securities, and through many other means. But whenever the government begins to practice populism and only funding social outlays, it's only a matter of time when the entire economy crashes. Now, I would like to touch upon some of the things the government should be doing and some of the things that it is actually doing while it shouldn't do those things. Now, very spectacular examples. The US is the biggest venture investor in the world. Now, if you look at DARPA, this is actually a government-funded company. So Silicon Valley was not created by those entrepreneurs. It was purposefully created with public investment. SpaceX, that we all know, the global leader in space industry, thrives because of government orders. The structure of government orders is so non-transparent, and pricing is so non-transparent. Yes, kudos to Elon Musk. Yes, but that is the reason why he is not considering IPOing the company. What is the source of this money? You will be... it's funny, actually, but that is a restricted, a conditioned money issue. But, well, the US has a lot of public debt, but the Federal Reserve System has full license to print more dollars. That is probably the only country that can print dollars. But the issue is that they are only printing investable dollars. Why inflation's kept so low? Why they will continue moving forward? Because each time they issue new money, each dollar is accounted for and has strings attached to it. And it has an investability, an investment path. And this is one of the countries where entrepreneurship is probably the strongest, where free enterprise reigns supreme. And I would like to just go back to try and reconcile Dmitry and Volodymyr. A genuinely strong economy is an alloy between entrepreneurship and government incentives, in particular risk-based and anti-crisis incentives. So look, it's okay. When things are good, stay out. When things go bad, come in and help. Okay, and invest in areas that are needed in the industries that you want to grow, from the perspective of competent government managers. Question to you, Volodymyr. Unfortunately, one of the side effects, in particular, obstructing growth for an individual company is inequality. No, this is nonsensical. Inequality, well, if you read Thomas Piketty, another Marxist socialist thinker who wrote a whole theory about inequality, and I'm finding it difficult to wrap my brain around it. Okay, equality exists by nature. Capitalism is actually helping reduce inequality, and the best cure is competition for the consumer. Protectionism is disrupting healthy competition within the country. If we're talking about inequality, there is inequality between the public official and the entrepreneur because they do not have equal rights. One has the right to impose taxes on the other. Look, I can't do things that a public official can do. I don't have that authority. It's a big myth that capitalism is the one that creates inequality. Capitalism creates wealth. Everything that we are surrounded by, what we are wearing, those cameras in front of us, it's all the product of capitalism. Capitalism is free enterprise. You know what? I'm even finding it hard to think about how to dispel this myth that capitalism creates inequality. This is a myth. Are you that convinced? Yes. But if a company enjoys a monopoly in the market, and the monopoly will never exist without government support. A monopoly is when you have one single player, and it's only it's only can be government sponsored only. Like the government can decide that railways are monopolized, but in terms of return on investment, and your wealth is a function of output and growth of salaries, then there is no place for inequality. But in many situations, if you are earning super profits, it's not being distributed fairly. Look, if you want to create full equality, it's by making everyone poor. We've been down this road. When you do not bring everybody else up to the highest level, but you bring everyone down to the lowest level. So if you want full equality, everyone have the same wealth, then you should follow in the footsteps of certain African nations. No, maybe raise the lower boundary. No, look, this is a completely fictional, mythical discourse trying to stigmatize equal, unfettered relationships. If you want everyone to be of the same height, to chop off some of the heads, and then the Soviet Union had this equality, how to raise the lower boundary. Look, if you want equality, okay, let's go back to the Soviet Union, or North Korea for that matter. There, everyone is equal. Most people are equal there. Or you want to be another US, but even the US uses progressive taxation scales. Doesn't mean that it's a good thing. Look, a question that I would know: when was the first tax introduced? Federal income tax introduced for the first time in the US? The United States was formed in 1776 and 1789, the country. In 1913 was the first year an income tax was introduced. Look, you're saying that the government created the United States. No, entrepreneurs created it. The very first tax was introduced for the first time in as late as 1913. Okay, we are loving it when 10 companies control a certain market and people are paid very different money, because those being paid more, they have more opportunity to claim a larger share of the market. Anyone who doesn't have access for some reason to this piece of the pie, they sink to the bottom. I had one phrase: if you were not lucky enough to born in a wealthy family, found one. Become the founder of a wealthy family. But the same applies. But if you do not own the system, you're not welcome there. Who owns the system? Public officials, entrepreneurs. You are surviving. You're living on a powder keg on any given day. If you think doing business is easy, that a wealthy person is just wealthy by nature, it is a big misconception. It's somebody think that wealth creates itself. No. But it's a catch-22 situation when it's you in principle, you can never break out of this vicious cycle. Why? Come on, guys. Look at Forbes. It keeps changing. Global Fortune 500 new entrepreneurs coming. So look, if I look at BlackRock and the share of the likes of BlackRock in the capital of those companies, the same companies. But look, I don't know who taught you to be such a socialist. But look, to try and fight inequality is try to fight human nature. It ends in a return of the Soviet Union.
I really like this discussion. Made me at least 40 years younger, so it's wonderful.
Ну, как минимум, это, к сожалению...
Well, it's a minimum. What this is leading to in the modern world is that in these we may be up for premature deindustrialization because, okay, many countries are simply, it's a lost case. They will never catch up with the US or or China in terms of industrial development. We don't have much time left. We actually started late. Maybe 2-3 thoughts from each panelist to describe the optimal model for Ukraine. Henryka, we'll start from your end, if I may.
Careful, because again, I remember when we started our transformation and there were experts from the World Bank, the IMF, all those institutions coming and with their, ready solutions that actually completely didn't work in our environment. So I mean that you have to find your way, and fortunately, you can watch what happened in the countries of the former Soviet Union bloc. So it's much easier than it was for us when we started the process, and actually it was very hard to find any lessons. And definitely we went into this very liberal direction because that was the only dominating, solution. But now you know that actually we are living, and you are living in a democratic country with the election, terms. And it's not just about making, business community happy. You have to think about other parts of the society, and you have to learn from our lessons. And we know that actually we moved very fast, and there were definitely parts of the society left. And then, they stopped the process. So it's not that easy. We like it or not. If you want to live in democracy, we have to take into account the interests of other parts of the society. That's why, this institutional framework is so important. And again, I think that you are in a much easier position that we were in 1990, because you have to look what worked in Poland, what didn't work, we know what, and we can easily share that. What worked in Bulgaria, in Romania, in Slovenia, and knowing what's the structure of the economy, what's the structure of your society, you have to find, the best solution for you. Probably, again, it's not that you can write a scenario and then implement every part, because life is much richer than, that we can expect. But I'm pretty sure that you are absolutely right now on the right track to find your place in Europe.
Thanks. Vladimir?
If I had a time machine and if we traveled to the 1980s and if we showed our standard of living to those people, this conference center, our cars, and hundreds of thousands of businessmen, millions, they would go, "What have you done to achieve this? Is it because such great people took over as your government?" No, we simply allowed things. We allowed things to be owned by people. We allowed entrepreneurship. And the same people who were equal, because like my colleague wants to make everyone equal, we started seeing wealthy people and everything began to grow. I wanted just to look back. We are lucky that we can, in our thoughts, we can go back to where we came from and ask ourselves the question, what brought us here? Thank you. Yes, when I quoting from that author, so the U.S. the 1791. The U.S. must protect its industry to withstand competition from foreigners until they've grown their own industry. Alexander Hamilton said those words in 1790 in terms of the model that Ukraine needs. Now, yeah, it's 1791. He was behind measures to impose protectionism against British merchant ships by imposing. So we've got to accept that there is no free market economy. It's either Ukraine imposes its own agenda or other countries will come and impose their own. Now, this agenda is the formation of an export-driven industrial profile. and this is about encouraging deeper processing in Ukraine and exporting those products to other countries, and also encourage an environment in which Ukrainian producers can develop without too much risk from foreign competition. So all these machines and everything we have has been created by foreign-owned companies with support from their respective governments. It's like the path of a banana republic. So I'll be happy to drive a Skoda built by Eurocar in Western Ukraine. All these instruments are known. They've been around for centuries. Localization, we spoke about, industrial parks, exporting commodity export, targeted government programs, and I, as a member of parliament, I am supporting some of those initiatives, proposing them to parliament. Another area is to review international trade treaties and commitments that Ukraine's assumed completely blindly over the past several years. Now, it's something really controversial. The economic piece of the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement is not favorable to Ukraine. Now we can plainly state that. We have the right to initiate a revision of this. So the GPA agreement under the WTO, we have opened up our public procurement, nothing in return. We just shoot ourselves in the leg. So no, look, So there's war in this country. This is an opportunity to use this as a carve-out of those international treaties, and we should pursue this path. And in order to meet these objectives, it's like we've got to learn to become a capable government, to create industrial development institutions that will promote domestic manufacturing and production and promote exports, to protect our own domestic market. Thank you. Andrew, very briefly, look, as a company, we're working with maybe half of the whole world. And from this perspective, what I can say that Ukraine has very creative and talented entrepreneurs. Ukraine has a very competent, well, I'm comparing Ukraine with other countries, a very competent and skilled company management. I want our government to face our business community and our entrepreneurs and stop to see them as a cash cow, but they should see them as an important piece of economic growth and development. And I want them to begin to invest in new technology and promoting entrepreneurship. Those entrepreneurs that Volodymyr spoke about. Thank you. Johannes?
Because of time, I will be very, very brief and just focus on the public procurement angle. So what I would recommend is that obviously Ukraine, you need to build your own system. Every country is different, but look what other countries are doing. I would also really use public procurement as a strategic tool to invest in growth areas. And I would also build a system which is based on trust and a trust-based collaboration between the private and the public sector. I would use public procurement to promote domestic interest and industry, but at the same time be very careful that Ukraine is also integrated into the international supply chain.
Thanks. И в окончании.
And in closing, there's one point that I would like to raise. Yes, equality is probably unachievable, but at the same time, the topic that we have been discussing during this panel discussion will always be a controversial one, because a balance is elusive. Because if you tilt it towards one side, then it's going to harm the interests of the other side. But you know what? Society is kind of moving from those peaks and troughs between light and darkness, and it's, if we look at one particular country and its path, it shapes the balance and the scale of involvement that the government should take. I would like to wish every one of you present here, where we are, our strength is there. So will always be some counteraction, either helping us or obstructing our progress. I would like to thank our colleagues for this very useful and interesting and heated discussion. I would like to thank the audience that I've seen the first time in 5 years. There was applause, there were lively, very really emotional reactions. Thank you for finding the time to attend this session. Thank you.